Well, welcome, you five, and welcome online. My name's Diane Dew. I'm a registered dietitian with TriHealth. Been with TriHealth for quite a while and get to do a lot of different opportunities, a lot of engagement out in the community, a lot of health coaching and that sort of thing. And then I also teach for the University of Cincinnati. So I teach human nutrition, personal wellness classes, so it just kind of all fits in together. So with lactose, this milk sugar, we all make an enzyme called lactase, and it breaks down the sugar. It separates the molecule. Well, if any of you are lactose intolerant, it just means your body no longer makes that enzyme, so the sugar molecule can't be separated. It stays together like this. And when it stays together like this and it travels through your intestinal tract, it can feel like you swallowed a bucket of nails. So I don't know if any of you are lactose intolerant or know of anybody that is. Anybody know of anybody in their family? Yeah, it's very, very common, and it's very common the older that we get, that we're lactose intolerant. But that's the issue with lactose, two sugar molecules attached together. Then what we'll find, we see fructose. So fructose is the sugar that's actually occurring in fruit, and that's a naturally occurring sugar, but we'll come back to differentiate that. And then sucrose is just this good old table sugar. So again, there's a lot of names for sugar. At the end of the day, once the body breaks it apart, it's going to do the same thing in the body. So how many teaspoons, if you all had to guess, would be equivalent to the average amount that an American consumes today of sugar in a day? How many teaspoons would you think that we on average consume? 24.
10.
10. 50.
42.
42. 25.
100 plus.
100 plus. I love all these guesses. 25.3. So 25 teaspoons of sugar in a day. Now, in my little jar here is about 10 teaspoons. So that means in a day, most of us are taking in 2.5 times this amount of sugar. Yeah, so holy cow is right. If I set this amount of sugar in front of you, you would say, oh, I'm not going to eat all that sugar. You know, that sugar lasts me a long time. So where I'm headed with this eventually is that there's a lot of sugar hiding in the food that we're taking in every day. Some of it we know of and some of it we don't. But that's about how much sugar we're consuming on average per day. And if you go back and look at the statistics going back years, it just continues to gradually climb. And then at the same time, what climbs is our incidence of things like diabetes. So there's not an absolute direct connection. Some people can eat a lot of sugar and never get diabetes, but there is some kind of link in there, and I've got a little quiz for you here in just a minute to look at that from a at-risk for diabetes perspective.
How many grams is that, 25?
So 25 would be 100, 25 teaspoons, there's there's 16 grams of sugar per teaspoon. So 16 times 25. From a calorie perspective. So we do need sugar. People, a lot of times in my career, what I have found is that there's certain foods that become villains. When I started out in my career, eggs were really the villain. Bad eggs are going to give you high cholesterol, and we got to really limit eggs. And now today, where we are with eggs, the recommendation is up to 2 eggs per day, no problem at all, and they don't think the cholesterol in eggs is linked to the cholesterol in our bloodstream. So with better science, we keep finding all these different changes with sugar. So we still do need sugar in the diet. One of my slides here will list out here for you what we need it for. It makes our food taste good. It helps with fermentation. It helps to preserve our food, helps our food hold its color, and at the end of the day, sugar fuels every cell in our body. So if we don't consume it, our body's going to make it. So we need sugar. It's essential for life. You ready for me?
The best I can do is give you the keyboard.
Okay.
Try to dance it over.
All right. That sounds
All you'll
good.
need to, so if you want to go back, you'll just, how do you want to go forward? Just
All right, will do. Thank you.
apologies on that. I guess it wasn't set up for that.
That's all right. So there's our agenda. We already kind of talked about where do we get calories from, types of sugar, a few sugar facts, and then what sugar's doing for us in our diet. So, sorry I can't move that little screen up there, and welcome to those of you online. So, one thing about sugar to know is that sugar absorption starts under the tongue. If any of you have known any people who have diabetes and their blood sugar drops low, if you put any kind of sugar under the tongue, it will start to absorb immediately into the bloodstream. So when we eat something sweet, especially if we swirl it around in our mouth, even for a few seconds, that sugar starts to be absorbed directly into our bloodstream if it's in its most simple form. So sugar gets absorbed very quickly and easily. But what my slide shows up here is the second bullet point. Once we consume sugar, so if I eat something that's really sugary sweet, so let's say I decided to just have all these teaspoons of sugar, as soon as the sugar moves out of my intestinal tract into the bloodstream, it flips the switch in the body, and the body starts making insulin. Insulin is what will take the sugar from the bloodstream and move it into the cells so it can get used. So that's what this slide says. Blood sugar increases, then insulin production is triggered, and then the insulin is just basically a carrier. It carries it into the cells. So the cells then use the insulin for fuel. It fuels everything that we do. It's very vital to life. And if our body doesn't consume it, our body's going to make it. Now, one important thing here, if we consume too much sugar at one time, the body doesn't know what to do with it. So if we consume too much sugar at one time, the body makes a lot of insulin to take care of that sugar, and then the insulin has to do something with it. So it's kind of like when you're putting gas in the car. Your engine, your gas tank might hold 15 gallons of gas. But if you're standing there and you're trying to put 30 gallons of gas in that gas tank, the other 15 are going somewhere. So the same analogy holds true here. If once the sugar enters the bloodstream and the body doesn't need it for anything, the body stores it. So there's a direct link between consuming too much sugar and the body storing it as body fat. So what I like to recommend on that front is that, number one, if we're going to have something sweet, we have a small amount of it and we have it with a meal. It slows this whole reaction down. Your body's likely to burn it off and not store it as body fat. So again, by the end, we want to be, of this talk, we want to be smart about the sugar that we do eat and have sugar in moderation. So the slide will show you too much sugar intake. We hear a lot about insulin resistance, that little term on the bottom. So again, if too much sugar is in the bloodstream and there's a lot of insulin and the insulin's trying to get the sugar moved into the cells, for some reason, it starts to lock the cells. The cells no longer let the insulin in with the sugar. And that's what we call insulin resistance. We consume sugar, the body makes insulin, the cells won't let it in, so the body makes more insulin. Cells still won't let the sugar in, body makes more insulin. And that's what we call insulin resistance. So our blood sugar is high, we're making a lot of insulin, there's no sugar going to fuel all of our cells, and it's a whole negative reaction that's happening. Does that make sense on the blood level for what's happening with sugar?
So what happens with the excess insulin that your cells can't take in?
So the excess insulin, the body will break it down. But sometimes the sugar just continues to circulate in the bloodstream at too high of a level. So the body will break the insulin down, but sugar stays there. So some people can walk around with very high blood sugar levels for quite a while and never really know that they have high sugar in their bloodstream. And what's negative about that is the sugar is an irritant for all the cells in our body, especially the cells in our eyes, our kidneys, the capillaries in our fingers and our toes. So if too much sugar is staying circulating in the bloodstream, it aggravates and irritates them and they can stop functioning well. So that's why we see some people who have had poorly controlled blood sugar for a long, long, long time start to have kidney problems, they start to have vision issues and things like that. That high sugar in the bloodstream has just caused too much trouble. Any other questions on that? So that would kind of be sugar. can't talk about sugar really without talking about sugar substitutes. You can't see it up here, but all these sugar substitutes, and I have a sample of them all here, are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, and they're all on a list that we call the GRAS list. Have any of you heard of the GRAS list? It stands for Generally Recognized as Safe. So it's where the Food and Drug Administration has investigated all these products and tried to determine, are they safe or unsafe? So right now, all the products are listed on the GRAS list as generally safe. And we'll talk about these in just a minute. But one of the issues with these sugar substitutes is that our tongue receptors all most of us have an inborn desire for these sweets. And sometimes the more sweets we have, the more sweets we want. So while sugar substitutes have really helped as far as decreasing our actual sugar consumption, the sugar substitutes are so much sweeter than sugar that there's a lot of evidence out there that they're training our taste buds to want things sweeter. So right now, that's the issue with sugar substitutes. It's like, boy, we can't win. So we all usually recognize them by their color packet. So aspartame is in the blue packets, known as NutraSweet. And a lot of times people can have their own particular preference for what they want. The saccharin would be the pink products, and that's known as Sweet and Low. And then sucralose is in the yellow packets, and that's known as Splenda. So they all can come from different sources, these sugar substitutes. Then that last one here is stevia, and that is actually from a natural herb that's native to South America. Now, my next slide here, most sugar substitutes lose their sweetness when they're heated up, so they're not good to bake with. Stevia would be the exception to that. So once that came out on the market, it's a nice alternative if somebody wants to decrease the sugar that's in a recipe. So stevia has the same texture as regular table sugar. You know, sugar substitutes all have that fine powdery texture to it. Stevia is the same texture as regular sugar, so you could use stevia just like you could sugar, or sometimes I recommend doing a half and half if you're baking cookies or you're making a recipe. Use half regular sugar and half stevia if you want to decrease somewhat the sugar that's in your recipe. But again, all these sweeteners, 400 to 600 times sweeter. So I did put some alternate names for sugar up here already. I read those off of the list, but you'll see some of these up here, and I can make this PowerPoint available to anybody. But again, we see honey up there on the left-hand side and maple syrup. Just a reminder, just because they're from a natural source doesn't mean that they're any different than the sugar that's in our drinks or found in our candy bars. Our body's going to break it down. Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the sugar substitutes. When you ingest a sugar substitute, does the body treat that like, say, natural sugar? Or does it treat it like a chemicalized form of sugar?
The latter is more true. So the body is just going to break that down into its chemical element. So it's not recognized anywhere else through the body as sugar in any way, shape, or form. It's just in its own category as an additive, just like any additive would be in our food. The only difference is that when it hits the taste buds on our tongue, that's where we detect the sweetness, and that's its primary purpose.
So for instance, I've noticed now in diet drinks, for instance, you might have Diet Coke and then you have Coke Zero. So is there any difference, for instance, in those two sodas?
I'd have to look at the label. They're using some different types of the sugar substitutes. So, and for whatever particular reason, whether it's cost or manufacturing is easier with one type of sugar substitute over another, it all depends. So that would be the only thing that I would think is that's what's different in there. I'll have to look that up. I haven't looked up what the sugar substitute sources are in there. Chewing gum's another big one. You know, you can see all different sugar substitutes in chewing gum. And that's gotten really popular as far as that goes. Now, one thing is that if you consume a lot of sugar substitute, all at one time, it can cause kind of gas and bloating. It can be an irritant a bit to the stomach. Now, you'd have to consume a lot. And typically, that's where we would get some kind of alternate food that had the sugar substitutes as part of that food item. Just adding it in powder form typically wouldn't cause that. But, you know, if we see diet products out there in the grocery store and whatnot, that's where these might be in those products. Or some of the more Atkins type, not their products, but like the high protein, low carbohydrate items will a lot of times use these sugar substitutes. And again, that's where for some people it can be irritating to the stomach. Just causes a little gas and bloating.
So does that mean, not that it's realistic, but if you're ingesting, let's say a diet only filled with sugar substitutes, which is pretty much impossible.
Yes.
If you were, does that mean insulin does not come on board?
Insulin would still come on board, but in a lower level because sugar is still going to be present in foods like breads and cereals and fruits and grains and vegetables. So once the sugar in there is ingested, then it's going to trigger this insulin reaction, but at a much lower level. And that's where all the recommendation is. We should eat so that we don't produce as much insulin. Did that answer your question? Yes, yes. So to come back to the added sugars question, so I put a little food label up here and with the added sugar noted. So this is how, so these food labels are all regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, and now added sugars have to be listed on the food label. So you'll see where I circled, just right above that is total carbohydrates, 37 grams. Of that, 4 grams are fiber because that's a carbohydrate. And then it says total sugars, 12 grams. And then it's going to tell you the added sugar. So that means that the 10 grams of added sugar were sugar like this that was put into whatever that food product was. The other 2 grams that are in there were naturally occurring in whatever this food label was from. So it's the added sugar. When we talk about sugar in just a minute, how much you should consume in a day, it's that added sugar line that you want to pay attention to, not the total sugars, unless you are diabetic and tracking that for some reason. If you're trying to keep your sugar intake low to decrease this insulin reaction and for good health, that's the line you're looking for. Any questions on that on a food label?
The added sugars, that's what you want to look at.
Uh-huh. And you'll be surprised if you go hunting for added sugars. It's in tomato sauce, it's in boxed items, it's a lot of places, just this added sugar. So sometimes we can meet our recommendations for sugar just by not eating anything sweet and eating a regular diet, depending on what it is we have in the diet. So the recommendations for sugar for women would be 6 teaspoons a day, which is 96 calories, men 9 teaspoons a day. So, and again, thinking about what's in my little container here, this is 9.5 teaspoons. So this would be how much added sugar a man should have in a day and a woman should have 2/3 of that.
Added or total?
Added. Added sugar. And we're going to look at a label in a minute just to look at that just a little bit. So that's added sugar, not the total. The reason for that, and I didn't bring any fruit here to lay out on the table, the reason for that is if we looked at, again, so many things like our fruits and our vegetables, there is sugar that is naturally occurring in an apple, for example. But the sugar is all bound in the flesh of the apple. So when you chew that apple up and it enters your stomach, it takes a while for the system to digest that apple. So the sugar hits the bloodstream very slowly, and it doesn't create this kind of insulin reaction as it would if we're eating just a plain candy bar. So that's why the naturally occurring sugar is always bound up with something else and is not what we're concerned about. It's the added sugar. And I get asked a lot about things like fruit. Some people say, oh, bananas are high in sugar. All fruits have about the same amount. So there's not one that's better than another. The sugar is bound in the flesh, so any fruit that you want to eat, you want to enjoy. Now, just to take a side note, what I will say, so I brought a bottle of apple juice here. So sometimes people will say, oh, this is apple juice and it's from concentrate. It's 100% juice, it says on the label. So it's deceiving because it seems like, oh, this should be a great product for us to have. So in this apple juice, there are 34 grams of sugar. So 34 grams. And the sugar in the apple juice isn't bound to anything. So the body's just going to break that down, absorb it very, very quickly. So juice can really be a problem for anybody trying to lower their sugar level. So as a dietitian, I don't often recommend juice. I'll say, you know, for this bottle of juice, you could have 3 apples. And so it takes a long time to eat those apples. You get all the fiber and the nutrients from the apple, and the sugar is bound up in the apple. So a lot of the sugar we get is from what it is that we drink.
Is that no added sugar, just 30-some grams of sugar?
So on the label here, and I'll pass this around, so it says total sugar is 34 grams. It says includes 0 grams of added sugar. So I did bring one that's tricky just to justify here for you. So because they took they took just the juice out of the apple, they freed up all the naturally occurring sugar. So the sugar in the juice is naturally occurring, it's not added, but it's not bound to any flesh anymore.
So it may as well just be added sugar.
Correct? Might as well be just Kool-Aid that you're drinking or lemonade or something like that. That is correct. With very little nutrients left in there because you don't have the peel, you don't have any of the flesh of the apple and things like that.
How about sugars that are used in fermentation?
So sugars used in fermentation are often broken down in the fermentation process. So there'll be some left at the end, but not the same as what was in the beginning. So the yeast is building off of that for the sugar as a fuel. So the sugar is going to be broken down, converted. So it's no longer in its simple sugar form. So I have just a little quiz here. There's 6 questions. And this is just a standardized little quiz put out by the American Diabetes Association. So these first 3 points on here, if you answer yes to this, give yourself 5 points for each one. So if you're 10 pounds or more overweight, give yourself 5 points. If you're 65 or older with little exercise, give yourself 5 points. If you're between 45 and 64 years old, give yourself 5 points. If you're a woman and had a baby 9 pounds or greater, give yourself 1 point. If you have a sibling with diabetes, give yourself 1 point. And if you have a parent with diabetes, give yourself 1 point. So you want to add all of those up, and I can go back if you want me to. But if you have a score of 10 or higher, it's an indication that you might be at risk for diabetes. Doesn't mean you have it, doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it means you might be at risk for diabetes just because some of these genetic factors that you can't control and are there and present. Any questions on that? Yeah, so again, put out by the American Diabetes Association. They have a wonderful, wonderful website out there with all kinds of information. So what are we going to do about all this? So, you know, it's a little about sugar substitutes, where are we finding it, this little diabetes quiz. So first of all, rethink your drinks. That, when the researchers study this, where do we get our sugar from? We get a tremendous amount from our drinks. So it's from our juices, it's from our specialty coffee drinks. It could be from beer or wine or mixers in what it is that we're drinking. We get them from a lot of sources. So I have some drinks here just to show you. So this is sweet tea, and this is 23-ounce Arizona sweet tea, and this has 15 teaspoons in the can. 61 grams of sugar. So again, you want to think about where is your sugar coming from, and I don't have it up here to compare. Well, I'll show you a candy bar here. So my Baby Ruth bar has 33 grams of sugar in it. So for some people, maybe they might want to get their sugar from their tea, or maybe they might say, I'm going to drink some diet version, or better yet, water, because I want to eat a candy bar at the end of a meal. So sometimes it's just awareness and what kind of choice are you making. We see a lot anymore of energy drinks. So, where my energy drink went to, must have fallen off the table here. So energy drinks can be really culprits for this. Oh, the Monster, I'm looking right at it. So this has 13 teaspoons of sugar, this Monster drink, and I put that sugar down here in this little cup. So that's how much sugar is in this one can of drink. Again, and so what happens a lot of times is that we'll find where people will drink these things, and they tend to drink them outside of a meal. They're just going to drink them. They're going to get some kind of energy drink. They're going to get a pop of some kind. And again, when you take that outside of a meal, that sugar gets absorbed very quickly. A lot of sugar, a lot of insulin, and could set us up for a problem. Now, here and there, it's not an issue. But if it's the day in, day out practice, that's what you want to be on the lookout for a while. And the reason I put all this teaspoon in this little jar is because that's what's in one can of pop. So any regular pop is going to have this much sugar. And most people would say, I would never put that much sugar in one container of anything to drink, but that's what's lurking in there. So unbelievable, this amount of sugar. Now, my body armor here, and a lot of times now, any of these sports type drinks, so sports drinks will come regular, and then a lot of times they'll have a lighter version. So this particular sports drink has 28 grams of sugar in it. So, we think, oh, we're going to work out, we'll have something to replenish those electrolytes and fluids. Typically, we don't need it. Typically, all we need is water. We don't drink near enough water in a day. So these, you need some kind of drink like this that's got some sugar and electrolytes in. If you're running a marathon, if you're working out for more than a couple hours in your heavy sweater, that's when these kind of products could be beneficial. And a little sugar is good, but a lot is not necessary. So again, it's going to create that whole reaction. So just beware in what it is that you drink. Now, what I find out there is that we're finding things like vitamin water. So this is a vitamin water with 0 sugar. So they put the nutrients in, and there is 5 calories in this bottle of vitamin water. Now, interestingly enough, I've had this for about almost a year, and it's really losing its color. So I find that intriguing. Whatever they put in here, light must cause the color degradation in here. But the sweetener in here happens to be stevia. And it'll declare on the ingredient list whatever the sweetener is. So sweetener, stevia in there. And then my drink I brought here was a spicy hot V8 juice. So don't know if any of you are V8 juice fans at all or not, or especially the spicy hot. I helped my daughter move a few weeks ago and took a picture of her. She was taking things out of her refrigerator. She's got not one, but 2 huge bottles of hot sauce in her refrigerator. I'm like, it would take me 10 lifetimes to use 1 bottle of hot sauce, and she's got 2 in her refrigerator right now. But this has, in this container, it has 10 grams of sugar. But I'll pass this around because, once again, like that apple juice, so the 10 grams of sugar is total sugar, and it includes 0 grams of added sugar. So they took the vegetables and they juiced the vegetables and got the naturally occurring sugar out of the vegetables. So again, that's going to be another exception to some of our sugar rules here.
That would just be like the juice, same thing.
Yes, yes, yes. Now the only difference with V8 is sometimes there's a few more nutrients in it. But again, I really recommend people chew whatever it is that they're going to have. Don't drink calories. The other thing about drinking a lot of these with this sugar, so the sugar increases our sugar awareness and triggers our body to want more sugar. And then the other thing is that the researchers are looking at how many calories we get through drinks, which right now is about 20%. So if I need 2,000 calories in a day, about 200 of those calories I'm drinking if I match what the current standards and statistics say. And the researchers are looking at that in a given day to feel satisfaction so that our body stops feeling hunger, we have to chew. And that if we drink our calories, it doesn't satisfy anything. So we're drinking our calories, but we're still hungry and not satisfied, so we're seeking food out. So the moral of the story is don't drink your calories and don't drink your sugar on all that. So that would be rethinking your drinks. Any other drink questions? One other thing about drinks is that I do a lot of health coaching, and so I always ask if somebody is a beer or a wine, has anything in that whole category or any kind of spirits. And we're seeing just a huge explosion of these IPAs and these craft beers out there. So with these craft beers, the alcohol level is really increasing, and so the calorie levels are really increasing. So some of these beers, for a 12-ounce beer, you could get 275 to 300 calories in a beer, if it's really a craft beer with a high alcohol content and a lot of fermentation that happened. So just something to think about there. Number 2, rethink when you have your sweets. So to slow down this sugar-insulin reaction, you want to slow down how fast the sugar enters the bloodstream. To do that, if you're going to have something sweet, have it with a meal or have some kind of protein with it. So if you want, say you want to have some kind of, some Hershey Kisses later on this evening, don't have just the Hershey Kisses. Have a couple cubes of cheese. Have a handful of nuts. Some kind of protein. So the protein, along with the sugar, will slow down the body's ability to move it into the bloodstream, and it will decrease that insulin reaction. So again, I'm not saying we can't have our sugar, but we just want to be smart about how we have these sweets if we're going to have them. Number 3, rethink what you eat with your sweets. So again, you want to have nuts. So I have some of these, all these candy bars I have up here for a particular reason. Do you know what these all have in common? I have a Snickers, an Almond Joy, a Baby Ruth, and a Payday. Nuts. Yes. So if you're going to have something like that, have, the actual nut candy bar with the nuts. There's not a ton of protein, but still it's a little better than what some of these candy bars are. So just something to think about from that perspective. I did also bring in, I found this in the gas station. So I friends getting my coffee with the gas station person so they don't mind me poking around all these different things. So the items that are closest to the cash register could cause the most trouble. So any guesses on how much added sugar is in this little chocolate banana swirled loaf cake that I could probably have gone in 4 bites?
20.
Almost double, 37. 37 grams of added sugar, and there's 400 calories in here. For the 400 calories, I could have a nice ham sandwich with lettuce and tomato and a few potato chips on the side if I was smart on my bread choice. So that's why just reading these labels, where's this all coming from, are so important. Number 4, eat a variety of foods. Have your fruits and your vegetables and your whole grains. Eat a variety of foods. There was in the news a few months ago where breads are one of the highest sources of salt and highest sources of sugar in our diet. I'm never going to discourage somebody from eating whole grain bread. It's the sweets things and the donuts and the pies and the cookies. Those are the things that we really need to be on the lookout for. Number 4, I already shared, have protein anytime you're going to eat a food. It will always slow this reaction down. Number 5, do not avoid fruit. Already shared that. People think that some fruit is high in sugar or fruit is bad for you. What you want to avoid, as we've already said, is the fruit juice. And then number 6, read your food labels. Swap out more desirable foods for less desirable foods. A lot of times, things like with that muffin that I just passed around, sometimes once people know that it's not like they're married to eating that muffin, they'll choose something else that would be a better health choice. They're just not aware, haven't read the label, and don't know what else is out there that would be a better health choice. So eat a variety of foods, don't eat the sweets all by themselves, and don't drink your sugar would be my 3 biggest takeaways. What are your thoughts and questions?
How do you break the sugar addiction?
That's a great question, and I didn't put that in my slide. Again, dietetics is all research-based, so there is some research out there that to break the sugar cycle, you want to train your brain. So if your brain is used to something sweet, or let's say maybe you're having your coffee in the morning and then your brain says, oh, get a donut. Or after you finish a meal, you're getting those signals. So the research says to break that brain connection to wanting sugar, that you should have something tart. So any of you know, if any of you ever had a warhead? Do you know what warheads are? They're little, like hard candies, and they are crazy tart. They're super tart. You wouldn't need the whole thing. They're kind of in the same line as a super sour lemon drop would be. So if you have finished your meal, or you've had something sweet and your mind's telling you get some more, have something super, super tart. Doesn't have to be a lot, because what you want to do when the brain says have something sweet, you have something that's counter to sweet, and it stops that brain sending you the signal. And that's what you want to get your brain used to. A couple of the other things that work would be sauerkraut with a meal. Now, we typically only have sauerkraut here and there. But one of the other things is pickles. So I don't know if any of you like pickles. But pickles can be a good finishing thing. It's like if you go into a restaurant, why you get a lot of those with your sandwich. And a lot of times people have that pickle at the end of their meal. So sometimes having that tartness of a pickle will just be enough to send a signal to your brain that you're done, and to stop sending the signal for you to have more sweets. Have a pickle. And there's a little salt, but next to no calories, so I would say have a pickle to stop that. Lemon ice is the other thing that would do the same thing if you've ever had lemon ice. So not lemon sherbet, it has to be lemon ice because it's very tart, kind of wakes up the senses just a little bit, and it doesn't take much. Vinegar might. The trouble is that sometimes the vinegar's an acid, so you don't want that acid laying on your teeth, and sometimes that could create a problem. Sometimes salad dressing, like a balsamic vinegar, maybe just a little bit of that has a little bit altered acid content. I wouldn't take much. I'd take a very small amount. It could, but I always lean into something food-wise. Yeah, and I see some people take vinegar concoctions because they read that it's good for the blood sugar, or it helps stop that insulin reaction, but there's no research to support that at all. So sometimes having too much of that, again, if that acid can lay on the teeth and cause a problem. Sometimes it can upset the stomach. The body maintains a very tight acid-base balance, so sometimes it makes the body work harder at maintaining that. So don't advocate in general having just vinegar. I was coaching somebody a few months ago who's having some kind of crazy concoction with pepper and vinegar and turmeric all together. And so, they're like, they had to hold their nose and get it down, and, poor thing going through all that trouble, but not really likely seeing much health benefit from that. So
this is maybe related, maybe not, but with regard to the sugar conversation, frequently carbohydrates comes up. And I know some diabetics count carbohydrates and some diabetics count sugar.
Mm-hmm.
What determines, which lane you go down, and how important is counting carbohydrates versus counting sugar? Because there's a ton of carbohydrates in foods.
Yes.
Far more than, different than sugar.
You are exactly right. What matters first and foremost to a diabetic is counting carbohydrates. Because at the end of the day, all the carbohydrates will be broken down into sugar and absorbed into the bloodstream, no matter what its source is. It just can take a while. And for a diabetic, they either don't make enough insulin or they don't make any insulin. So having to deal with sugar is just something they need to be aware of every day. So total carbohydrates is what they should be looking for. Now, from an added sugar perspective, they're the same as us. They shouldn't be getting any of those high added sugar foods without having protein or something else to slow it down, because it's going to cause that same sugar rush in their system. So, but it's total carbohydrates they should be looking at first. That's why things, if you read labels, one of the items, I do a lot of consulting work in nursing homes, they like to use would be diet ice cream. And if you've ever read the food label on a diet ice cream, it has less added sugar, but it has more carbohydrates. So the diet ice cream is a worse product for our diabetics than the regular ice cream. So in general, in the field of dietetics, we don't typically suggest any diet foods. Eat a regular food item, just eat slightly less of it. So typically no diet foods, just for that very reason. I'd have to read the label on them to know specifically, but yeah.
I mean, that's a hard thing to explain to someone to understand.
Yes.
I mean, my dad is a bad diabetic, and my mom will not count carbs because she's not capable of it. She sees something that says no sugar,
Yes.
and she thinks that, oh, well, he can have 2 of these, there's no sugar.
Yes.
And I've given up trying. I
Mhm.
don't know how to break that cycle, but it's very, very hard.
And that's what happens a lot of times. People think there's no added sugar or no sugar, and this is totally fine. And no, the carbohydrates that on the slide where we showed the total carbohydrates, that's a sugar in a more complex form, like fiber or wheat or anything like that. But again, when the body is digesting it, it takes a while to digest it, and there's a lot of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, fiber that come from it. But when it's totally digested and moved into the bloodstream, it's broken down into simple sugar, no different than my sugar here. So that's why total carbohydrates are what needs to be looked at for a diabetic. Yeah. And all this sugar-free stuff can be deceiving. Like I said, the diabetic, the diet, a low-calorie, it's the Wild West out there for what people put on food labels. It really is. It's very deceiving.
Why is that allowed? I mean, it just seems like.
It is ridiculous. Yes, you have a great class. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it a lot. The Food and Drug Administration regulates some of those terms. So like if you said that it's high calcium or it's good for your heart, that has specific definitions to it. But a lot of these products, if it's a supplemental product, they can say whatever they want. So supplements aren't regulated the same way in the Food and Drug Administration as regular foods are.
But if something's like in the diabetic section at a grocery store and it says no sugar, like.
Yes,
That just seems
it's
like-
terrible. It's the manufacturers getting away with it, then the grocery stores putting it out there on the shelf, and it's a whole ripple effect. Yes, no,
I mean, it's
it's
a total racket. and
it is.
and
It
it's
is.
Feeding the poor health of everyone.
Yes. When I first started in my career, it was much easier to help coach diabetics on what it is they should eat because we didn't have all these crazy drinks and boxed items, and we didn't have all these manufacturers saying things like that. That's like if you look at like a bag of Twizzlers. A bag of Twizzlers proclaims real big on the front a low-fat food. Well, there never was fat in Twizzlers. Twizzlers are all sugar. So people sometimes see that and say, ooh, maybe that's not such a bad choice. Well, it's all sugar. So yes, it's very deceiving, and they all use it to their benefit. All of them.
Next class action.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean,
Yeah, those should be removed. And so there's a lot of regulation around the food label. So if we went back to that food label, what we're going to see here soon is it'll list the vitamins and nutrients that are of concern to the general public. And so they say that what might be coming off is potassium and what might be going on is iodine. But it's still too confusing to read this label. They need to make this easier and clearer for people who are diabetic or who are following a low-salt diet or whatever it might be.
So what would be the ratio difference if you were to try to convince somebody, you can't worry just about sugar. You have to worry about carbohydrates because carbohydrates become sugars. And based upon this label, sugars fall under the category of carbohydrates, which should be a clue, at least right there. Can you only count carbohydrates, or are you left with having to count both?
You can only count carbohydrates, and especially depending on what the person's willingness is to go along with diet changes, what it is that they're willing to look at. So if total carbohydrates at a meal, we as a dietitian would typically recommend somewhere between 30 and 45 grams. So if I'm coaching a diabetic, say in one of my retirement homes, in one of the nursing homes, That's what I would say. Eat a balanced meal and try to limit your carbohydrates to no more than 45 grams
Per meal.
per meal.
That's total all foods, yeah.
Yeah, 45 per meal. So that would be 3 meals, 45 each one of those meals, and then 15.
35 a day.
And then 15 grams or so, maybe a little more for a snack. Now, a lot of that gets, and again, I'll muddy the water. Some of that can get dependent on what somebody's body weight is and what their age is. So, but that would be an in general rule, up to 45 grams per meal. And that's always the first place I would start in working with the diabetic to try to have regulation of their blood sugar. And if they're eating a balanced meal, see, then it's going to be mixed together. And sometimes, not that I would disregard the added sugar, but again, you're going to have the protein and the fat, and that's going to help slow down how fast the body absorbs the sugar. So a lot of the oral medications for diabetes are meant to get the body to make more insulin or how it handles the sugar. And then for somebody who has to take straight insulin, a lot of times then, you know, that's more matched to what their meals are historically, what they need to keep their blood sugar in a normal range. It's a challenge though.
Any for dummies kind of advice on how to educate that? I mean, my parents are a lot older.
Yes.
And it's very hard, and I'm far from them, and I can't micromanage every minute. But, you know, my mom thinks she's given my dad a plate of food, and I've given her a picture of a plate where half of it and a quarter and a
Yes.
quarter. But, you know, she'll give him carrots, and she'll give him peas, and she'll give him applesauce or something like that with whatever it is. But it's like, to her, there's color on the plate,
Yes.
there's vegetables on the plate, but it's just like carb after carb after carb, and I don't know.
If you write down for me here as soon as we're finished, if you send me or write down your email address for me, I'll see if I can find something that would be in line that you might be looking for that would help. See if I could find something out there for you that would be in a very general kind of term like that.
Because I would appreciate, 'cause, I mean, my sugars are very high. They're very high.
Mhm.
And I don't eat a lot of carbs. I should be on the FODMAP because I have a lot of dietary issues. But I can't seem to control triglycerides or sugar. And I just see what's happening to my parents, and then
Sometimes triglycerides, that's if there's too much sugar, the body will, if the body can get it out of the bloodstream, it'll store it as body fat and it will elevate the triglycerides. So lowering the blood sugar will target the triglycerides. So that can really be a problem. One other thing is sometimes people think that they should have a low carbohydrate diet and they don't eat enough carbohydrates. So we need carbs in every meal. If you have too low of a carbohydrate diet, then the body makes sugar, the liver makes it and puts it into the bloodstream, and it puts a lot into the bloodstream.
I
So
don't have that problem.
with not eating enough carbs?
No, it's just, I mean, because you know, I know like within FODMAP, you can, watermelon and broccoli, I mean, they all have saccharides in them of different varieties. So there's no problem getting the carbs. It's just, I'm not a sandwich eater, I'm not a pasta eater.
How about protein?
I don't get enough protein.
That would be the one, just loosely discussing this, the one thing I would recommend, having enough protein. So that would look like at least 2 to 3 ounces at every meal and your snack. Because see, the protein slows everything down.
Right.
So if you just have too heavy of a meal of carbs, even if they're all healthy carbs, we're going to cause this whole reaction. So, and you know, and I would say look for alternate sources of protein. Don't know what your taste buds are like, but there's a lot of information out there about pea protein, adding pea protein powder to foods, things where protein in non-meat sources is really naturally occurring. So, bean powders. Non-fat dry milk. So sometimes, you know, with the FODMAP, you've got to take part of that into consideration, but there's a lot of options out there.
I think Patty has a question for you.
Oh, thank you.
I think
So-
you have to approve it.
Oh, I have to approve it. Let me, no. Dottie, can you send us your question back again? We're having technical trouble. Or unmute yourself. We may be able to hear you. See if Dottie's able to come back with her question. Yeah, so that would be my recommendation. And seek out a dietitian. So, seek out to sit down with a dietitian and go through your typical day of what you're eating and try to figure out what's creating the culprit in there.
Here.
Hi, Dottie.
So, my question is, you mentioned wine and beer. Do they tell you how much sugar is in those labels? I don't recall looking for anything like that, but maybe that's what causes those beer bellies. So.
It could, because there's a lot of calories typically in beer, and a lot of times they're mostly carbohydrates. So, and to answer your question, no. They do not like to disclose that, and they do not have to put a nutrition label on their product. So to find out, typically you have to Google it and find out, what's in your wine or what's in your beer. So the only thing that doesn't have carbohydrates or ultimately turn into sugar would be any of your spirits. So tequila, vodka, gin, those things don't. Everything else will.
I was just curious that you mentioned those when you were talking about rethinking your drinks.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. It's
Thank
very
you.
enjoyable.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? All right, well, I'll be here, so we're all finished. Thank you very much.